information on prevention, tools for a healthy lifestyle. Make little changes to be the best you. It's all here. A podcast empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda to live well. Bermuda Health-Abets. Everything from A to Z on healthy living. Brought to you by the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health in collaboration with local health partners.
Welcome to an episode of Bermuda Health-Abets. This is a podcast where we discuss everything from A to Z on healthy living with the mission of empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda's residents. Hi, I'm Marie Beach, your host today, and I'm the Healthy Schools Coordinator for the Department of Health. I've been working for the government of Bermuda for 41 years, and I've been with the Department of Health for 20 of them. In my current post, I work closely with the Department of Education, other government departments, and most community health partners that have programs and activities in schools. Our guests today are Amy Da Costa,
Hello.
the Core Reading Program Director, and Stacey Kyme, the Core Reading Program Assistant Director.
Hello.
They're from the Reading Clinic. Good morning, Amy and Stacey.
Good morning, Ms. Beach. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us this morning. So let's start with introductions. Amy, can you tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm the director of the Core Reading Program at the Reading Clinic. Been with the Reading Clinic for 14 years now, and I'm a fellow of the Academy of Orton-Gillingham Practitioners or Educators, which has now been renamed the Orton-Gillingham Academy. I have a number of hats in my role, and I'll be tutoring myself as well as training tutors to take part in our program, offering workshops to parents in the community and teachers, setting up students for tutoring services, a number of things.
Yes, thank you. And Stacey?
Hi, my name is Stacey Kyme, and as noted, I am the Assistant Director of the Core Reading Program at the Reading Clinic. I'm also involved with pairing students with their tutors, as well as training and supporting tutors and parents and teachers and the community. And I also tutor as well, and I've tutored children for the past 11 years. So yeah, and
Love what we do.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that our primary schools are very lucky to have the support of the Reading Clinic, and I've worked along with different tutors myself. I'm a speech-language pathologist and worked in the school, so I've met many of your tutors through the decades, and I know what a valuable role you play in the schools. Okay, so our topic today is Understanding Dyslexia. So let's start with the first question. What services are offered at the Reading Clinic?
Okay, so the Reading Clinic has 4 programs. So our original program is the Core Reading Program, which helps students with dyslexia. Our second program is the ICANN Math Program. So this supports students who have a math-based learning difference, like dyscalculia. We also have an iPlay program, which is our preschool pre-literacy program. So this program boosts important pre-literacy skills like phonological awareness. And then we have our 4th program, which is our assessment program. And we'll be focusing on our core reading program and our assessment program.
Excellent. Can I just interject a question? So you do know that speech-language pathologists work with children for phonological awareness as well.
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to work co-treat with a speech-language pathologist?
That's a great question. I think the short of it is different clients, different cases, and different recommendations. So there have been opportunities in the past, but definitely something that would be great to explore more as well, because I could see the relationship and the interconnectedness and how that could be beneficial.
Definitely. And you can contact the Department of Health for that as well. You can speak to our contact person. She can link you with our program manager.
Wonderful.
If
That's
you want to go
fantastic.
in that direction.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. So our listeners are probably dying to know, what is dyslexia?
That's a great question. Normally comes with a 3-hour workshop response, so I'll try and keep it brief. So dyslexia is a language-based learning disability. We like to call it a learning difference. And it's neurobiological, which means it's how your brain works, how you process information. At the most basic level, most people will think of it as being difficulty with reading and difficulty with spelling. And yes, that is at the core, and we'll definitely explore that a bit more today. One thing I think is helpful to add into our understanding, first look at dyslexia is, many of us have heard of it, but it also has a new name, and not a lot of people know that. I think this is particularly important if we have teachers or principals who are listening, who might be picking up a report from a child at their school and scan through looking for dyslexia and don't see it. But it also goes by the name specific learning disorder with impairment in reading and possibly also spelling or writing added on to the end as well. So you may see that different label in a report. So something to keep your eye out for.
Yes.
And that was updated fairly recently in the community.
We'll ask you to repeat that later on in the
Sure.
interview, just so people can start to learn the new language, the new label for it.
I'll add on to that just to say, though, that it probably will be continued to be called dyslexia for a really long time.
Okay.
That's how it's known in the community, but the formal language may look different in a report. So.
Yes, that's so important to know. I would have written hundreds of speech language reports, and definitely keeping in mind the language has to be reader friendly at a certain reading level and so on and so forth. So I think it's good to start educating people about this, that the title of the disorder has changed. Still captures
Yes.
dyslexia,
Yeah.
but it's not just dyslexia.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Is there a cause for dyslexia?
A cause? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. If I can quickly just add one other thought.
Sure.
One question we get a lot is if there's different kinds of dyslexia.
Okay.
And people don't fit neatly into boxes. So often we'll be asked, is this mild? Is it severe? Is it this kind or that? And basically, when we're doing an assessment and looking at a child, we're looking at their brain and so many different variables of how they think and how they work and how they process. So with all those variables, there's different kinds of profiles that can develop with different outcomes, because they also have different environments and different support strategies. So
Yes.
tend to shy away from a label in that
Yes.
sense of a
Yeah.
specific subcategory. So then sort of talking about the causes.
So you're born with it. It's dyslexia is a brain-based learning difference. So every brain is different. So if you think that the world would be, if you think about it, the world would be incredibly boring if everybody had the same sort of brain. And so dyslexia reflects certain patterns and those differences.
For sure. I think that there's a lot of myths that are out there and circulate and have done since the start of talking about dyslexia, and one of them is that people tend to think that dyslexia is associated with low intelligence, and it's not. In fact, dyslexia has always existed. That type of brain has always existed, of course, but we didn't have a label for it. And the first case studies when people were looking at this puzzling condition and trying to figure it out was because there were exceptionally smart children who could not seem to learn how to read. So
Yes.
high intelligence was at the core of trying to understand it in the first place. And with the diagnostic criteria, you actually have to rule out intellectual disabilities to be able to diagnose dyslexia. So that's a myth we like to nip in the bud for sure. And there are some relative weaknesses that tend to pop up in the majority of profiles of individuals with dyslexia. The key one being phonological awareness that you've already mentioned, and rapid naming, and there can be both. Phonological awareness being the ability to work with and manipulate sounds, which is really important for trying to blend sounds together to read a word or break a word into sounds to spell. And rapid naming, how quickly you can pull a label from your brain. And those things in combination can make it extra challenging for someone to read if they're a weakness for a student.
And it's also worth noting that that despite what we think, reading is actually not natural to us, like we speak. So we have to explicitly learn how to read. And so since our brains work in different ways, that will come easier to some as to others. So for example, in regards to composing a symphony or being an aeronautical engineer, some things come easier to others.
Thank you for that. Are there any signs and symptoms of dyslexia?
There are lots of things we can look at. So I'll start off with everyone's go-to. My child reverses B and D, he must have dyslexia. But that is not a definitive sign. That's a really normal thing to do, and pretty much every child will do it at some point.
Yes.
When you think about it, in preschool, they're learning 26 lowercase, 26 uppercase,
Yes.
plus all the sounds that come with it. And if I sat here holding a water bottle and flipped it upside down, it stays a water bottle. But if I held up a B and flipped it upside down, it becomes a P or a Q, depending on how you move it. And so it's really natural to mix those elements up and have those kinds of things. You know, we mentioned briefly that reading and spelling can be weaknesses, but to dive in a little more deeply, you might have difficulty decoding, breaking a word into sounds to read it. Reading fluency may be hit because you're pausing to decode or struggling to recognize some of the words. Reading comprehension is actually generally a strength for students with dyslexia because it's an opportunity for them to use their intelligence and their problem-solving skills to be able to figure out, you know, that missing word that they can't quite pull apart. But if someone has really weak decoding skills, that's going to impact their ability to comprehend, because if you're spending all the time decoding, you're filling up your working memory with processing and not getting to take information from the text. So those are some of the big signs for reading. And spelling, phonetic, hopped being spelled H-O-P-T.
Yes.
Slower writing, messy handwriting are things that can come along with it. So those are some of the big things that we can see as signs, and I'll jump in with some others.
Yep, and then there are some early signs, so trouble with rhyming or mispronouncing words. So other signs could be maybe they don't really enjoy school. We get that a lot, or they all out avoid reading. But they're great at problem-solving skills, so this can lead to developing fantastic coping strategies. So that can be creative ones and productive ones, or not. And they also have strengths in art and creativity. So.
Visual spatial strengths as well. You might be really great at design, building your Legos when you're really little, or your daughter might really enjoy designing homes in her spare time, you know, on the weekends. They can be quick to pick up technology, have really great athletic or musical skill. Other notable ones, family history. You know, it runs in families. We'll talk some more about that as well.
Going to ask you that, is there a family history?
It does run in families,
Familial.
and but there is a genetical or
They're investigating it on and on. There's some
Okay.
research ongoing about whether or not there's a true genetic link, but it definitely runs in families.
Yes.
So, you know, you could be the first one to be diagnosed in your family, but you may have noticed that, you know, Aunt Carol or one of your cousins has difficulty with reading or spelling, so they might not have been diagnosed, but, you know, for whatever reason, but, it can.
Wow. Is this a temporary or lifelong condition?
Good question. It is,
So you're born with it,
yep.
and you'll have it your whole life.
Yes.
But the big thing is that it changes. What the impact is will change with time. I don't know if you want to.
Just trying.
So if you imagine, let's transport in time for a minute. We're in a hunter-gatherer society. Reading and writing don't matter. They don't exist. So the kind of person who's going to do really well in that society is the person who can navigate well, who knows how to lead, the person who can innovate and design the tools that will help capture the food to feed their group, the person who can recognize those subtle patterns and how the weather's changing to know that you need to move to safety and all those kinds of things. Those are all strengths of people who have dyslexia, right?
Yes.
They are also the 21st century skills that people want in their employment, in places of employment. And so these are things that we'll notice within that profile. So your environment makes a difference is where I'm going with that.
Yes.
When you're in your classroom,
Yep.
you
So
know,
when you're in your classroom,
and you're having to read and write,
yes.
you're not getting to put those skills, you know,
Right.
to use, right? You're being faced with your challenge all day, every day. But then when you get older and you're not in the classroom, your work experience is different.
Yeah.
Yes, so your work experience is different. You know, as an adult, you can rely on your supports. You have the experience because, you know, you might not be reading or writing as much as you would be when you were in school. So when you're an adult, you would tend to, you know, you're collaborating and you're working with your peers and your colleagues, and which you would get praise for because you're interacting and you're collaborating. But, you know, if you're doing that in school and you're looking at other people's, you know, your other students' work, you would be seen as cheating.
Yes.
So it's very different when you have dyslexia as a child as opposed to if you're an adult.
And you'll have it in all those instances,
Instances,
but
yeah.
the way it
Yes.
feels, right, is so different. This reminds me as well, we missed out one of the other things that can come along with reading and writing challenges in dyslexia is the social emotional piece. And I could talk about that for days, but I'm going to keep this brief, right? If you're struggling in school, you're probably not enjoying school all that much. And you can have the best teacher in the best classroom, and then the next year it's different.
Yes.
But when you're having a hard time in school, you might start to not enjoy school, not want to be there, and your learning experience drops. And that might influence an interest in dropping out when you're older. And unfortunately, there is a negative pathway that some students may end up traveling down. We hope to avoid those circumstances. But there's research, of course, local and from the United States, that indicates that there's a relationship between, thank you so much, between incarceration rates and low reading ability. And, this is something that we can get in there and support reading skills and can support our reading skills, and we want to help avoid ending up with those kinds of things happening in our community as well.
Yeah, that's very important. I, as you can imagine, have worked with children who had a challenge with reading. I remember particularly one boy I had at primary school. I met him in P6, and he couldn't read, and he tried his hardest. I did pull-out sessions so we could focus on phonological awareness. I did push-in his classroom, so, I could see what's happening there. Teacher and I co-taught. It was great. But at the end of the day, he still couldn't read. And I remember being at the end-of-year IEP meeting, and he was going off to middle school, and he was an avid sportsman. He glowed. He lived to play football, hit balls, catch balls, throw. And I remember telling the school, and his Nana came, and I said, Nana, make sure that when he gets to middle school, they focus on what he can do. Try to use his sports ability as the foundation. Never withhold it. Don't use it as punishment. That is his driving force. Use it to help him, if it's at all possible. Use it to help him to progress.
You've hit all the things that I definitely wanted to say. Understanding who you are as a learner is huge. I have a little anecdote on that in a moment. But also that support system, and the support system being more than just who you have at school. It's your family, it's your community around you. I know a lot of our children have taken a hit with COVID. Everything's been so different since then, and still remains different in how we interact and our experiences. But this is something that can be really challenging because our environments are not all the same. We don't all have the same access to opportunities, and even just, you can have the most dedicated parent, but what they can offer can be different from household to household. But finding those strengths and leading into your interests are so crucial. We've had 2 stories come up from past parents just this 1 week alone, where they've talked about getting an assessment was such an important thing for their child. I'm sorry, going off topic for a moment, but in terms of getting the label, a lot of parents shy away from the label. I don't want this label on my child. Don't tell them they have dyslexia. I shouldn't say a lot, but a handful. And we really try and encourage them to share the label with them, because labels can afford you so many wonderful things. They get you access to an IEP. They get you access to programs and support systems, accommodations for your exams and things like that. But more importantly, I think it gives you an answer. And so, like I said, twice this week alone, parents saying that it was like, like a light went on for their child to find out, oh, this is proof I'm not lazy. This is proof I'm trying. This is what I was trying to tell you. I'm doing my best. And there's something else that's holding me back. And I think that is such an empowering thing for a child to understand about themselves. Anyone to understand about themselves.
Very much. And that can lead into behavioral issues, a lot of avoidance issues, and it may be hard to sort of winnow out what the issue is, and a teacher seeing a child acting out and may not understand that it's that reading is the challenge, and the child's maybe trying to avoid having to be put in that position. And I know you would know that as children progress through their grade levels or year levels, reading is more important, even for math, and you've got the word problems.
You go from learning how to read to reading in order to learn.
Yes.
And that's so crucial because, give this analogy every now and then. Bermuda loves football. Imagine you go to school one day. Guess what? Bermuda loves football. We've changed the curriculum. Everything you learn is through football now. You might love it, and Bobby over there might be like, oh no, I'm toast. Right? And if every single thing you learn involved dribbling a ball up to your teacher or kicking it onto a target to be told a piece of information to learn, that child who can't kick it on target, why do they not get to learn? And that's the frustrating thing, because these children are more than capable. These, not just children, everyone in this category is so capable of learning, but the access to information gets sometimes held back because of the reliance on the need to read such extensive amounts to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. So would you say that only children have dyslexia, or are adults sometimes diagnosed? I know we've touched on some of the similarities and differences.
Well, I know that it does. It lasts your entire life. So it's just the way, as an adult, you would handle your experiences from school would be very different as an adult. So in regards to, by that point, you know how your mind works. You know what supports are out there. You know, if you might not even have a job that requires a lot of reading or writing. You might be very good with your hands and doing something completely different. For a child, it's very different because that's what they're going to be doing all day, all the time. So it's different, and it can change over time how you interact and your supports that you use.
For sure. And in terms of a diagnosis, I may be taking the question slightly differently here, but in order to get a diagnosis, you have to have seen the symptoms in childhood, essentially. An adult can get a diagnosis, but the symptoms have to have started when they were a child. And so that's one of the key criteria for a diagnosis.
So they didn't just develop it.
Yes, you don't suddenly wake up at 32 and I can't read. That would be something else.
Right.
Right. And I mean, there are rare cases where it might become a little more apparent later, and I think this speaks to the different profiles. If you have someone who's exceptionally intelligent, they have likely come up with so many strategies and workarounds that maybe it's not apparent till they're in their late teens and they go off to college, and then mom's not there anymore pushing them, and they didn't realize how much support mom was giving and things like that. So it can become apparent later in some of those cases, but it's generally really more noticeable in school because you're reading and spelling all the
time. Yes. Thank you. So can you briefly describe the process of the assessment?
So speaking for a reading clinic specifically.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'd ask, first of all, that a parent or legal guardian be the person to call. We have a lot of very interested, supportive teachers.
Yes.
But for confidentiality reasons, we have to take a call from a parent or legal guardian. So we offer consultations free of charge with our assessment director, and he will help a parent through or guardian through the next steps. So after the consultation, booking appointments for the testing. So they'll come in a couple times. During the assessment itself, they're looking at a number of areas, but three main ones are your cognitive profile, so how you think and process information, your phonological profile, looking at your sounds, and your ability to perform in the classroom. So what are you achieving in school? And so putting all those things together into a report, giving a feedback session to the parents, and hopefully with the school as well where possible, so that that child has a team ready to support them. That's the process in a bit of a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. So so now they've had the assessment, they have the diagnosis. What about treatment?
I love your use of the word treatment. It is a treatment. We have tutoring services, and people hear tutoring and they often think it's nice, you're reading to children or you're helping with their homework. And I'm in no way demeaning the value of that. That is valuable. But the tutoring that we have is a treatment because it's intensive, it's one-on-one, diagnostic, multisensory, it's prescriptive, very individualized as well, and it's done with a specially trained person, and it leads to structural changes in the brain. So it is a treatment. It's not a cure. You don't get rid of it. We have it for life, but it is a treatment to help with the symptoms.
So can you repeat that? Tutors are actually specially trained to provide treatment to the children that they work with.
Yeah, we are changing their brains. They're seeing it on. We haven't put our students in the fMRI machine, but we are using an evidence-based approach that they have been able to show through fMRI that brain is changing in reaction to this kind of intervention, which is great.
Beautiful. So let's see. So I imagine that children with dyslexia must find it challenging in the classroom. We've talked a lot about that and what that would look like. But do you find that children with dyslexia are actually distracted by the condition itself? Are they able to function well in other areas?
Well, each person has to deal with their circumstances in their own way, and it will be fairly unique, but you may get behaviors like the class clown or the avoidance tactics, and there may be some creative coping mechanisms like reading ahead when it's your turn.
I think as well, just to add on to that, slight segue, we get asked all the time if it's a gift, and that depends on who you ask,
Yes.
what point of the life they're in, and what their experiences were. But it comes back again to what your profile looks like, your environment, and your supports. So to come back to your question, the way a child's reacting in the classroom is going to depend. Is your teacher someone who understands how you think? Are they teaching to your strengths? I have witnessed a student with ADHD, different diagnosis, go from one classroom where the teacher just expected, sit down, shut up, say nothing, you're distracting my whole class, he's annoying me, to being with a teacher who understood him, and he became the highlight of that class. Wow. He was excelling, and all of his intelligence was able to show through. So I say that to say, how much this impacts you depends so much on those other pieces.
Yes. Yeah. Very important. I just thought of something else. A student I worked with many years ago, he was born in the Azores. Both parents spoke about 90% Portuguese, tried their hardest in different settings to speak English. And he spoke very good English, but he couldn't read. His phonological awareness skills were not age appropriate, and he struggled. And he wanted to drop out of school, and I met him at a high school. So he had been promoted year by year, and I think everyone was trying to work around what he was able to do, what his abilities were. But here I meet him, and like you said, I don't know if he was born with dyslexia, but I'm wondering, how would you differentiate a situation where a child is learning English as a second language, but only speaks English and very little of the parent's first language? How would you distinguish the two?
I'm very familiar with that scenario. I have some loved ones with that exact scenario, and many other children in Bermuda are going through that right now. I think that's another example of where the speech and language and reading clinic and similar services can really connect on that, because it's not a situation that's going to go away. We're a very multicultural environment, and that's only going to continue to be that way.
Yes.
So I think the more we're ready to handle that. But dyslexia is forgot what I was going to say word-wise here, but it doesn't discriminate. It can hit anybody, any language, any background, any culture, any age, and I think that there are certain languages where maybe it's not as prevalent because it's more phonetically controlled, like Spanish has a good one-to-one correspondence, and English has borrowed from so many languages. It's more complex, so a few things to think about when they're learning.
Yes, thanks for explaining that. So would you be able to share with us sort of any data related to the numbers of dyslexic people with dyslexia in Bermuda?
Okay, so just by thinking about just the prevalence in general, so we're just going to borrow U.S. statistics for right now. So the most conservative view is 1 in 20 people. So most conservative, but most people would agree it's probably closer to 1 in 5 people. So that means there's going to be at least one student in a classroom that's going to have dyslexia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Most people are shocked by that.
I kind of am.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, with prevalence rates, studies like this they take a group of people, they test everyone, whether they show signs or not, and then they get their answers.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of places like Bermuda, I'm going to give you some Bermuda numbers, but it's based off what's been done already. So it's not
Yes.
the same look.
Yeah.
You know, there will be people sitting right next to you with dyslexia and you have no clue. So it's easy to think prevalence rates are shocking, right? So the reading clinic did a bit of a needs assessment, and we reached out to a number of, this I think was last year, reached out to a number of schools, public and private, at the primary level, and ended up getting results surveying about 2,850 students. That's a good number of students at the primary level. And from that, we saw that there were 7.6% who already have a dyslexia diagnosis, already done. There was a further 3.5% who do not have a diagnosis at this time, but it was suspected or in the process of going through an evaluation. Adding those numbers takes you over 11%, which is in between that conservative 1 in 20 and below the more commonly accepted rate. But again, this is not a true prevalence rate. This is based off who actually came forward and already had an assessment or told their school. You know, maybe they haven't shared.
Yes.
So I think that we'd see that number being in line with the expectations for Bermuda as well.
Wow. Do you see that it's increasing, or is it a matter of just people coming forward to be assessed?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it will, I don't believe it's necessarily increasing, but I think the rate of diagnosis is increasing, and it's just increased awareness. Again, going through COVID, referrals for all sorts of things went up in that time because parents were home with their children and going, something's going on here, let's look at this. So it's increasing in that sense. There are more identified cases, but I don't think the number of actual cases has shifted. It's just diagnosed or not.
Yeah. Good. Okay, we're getting ready to close, but I just wanted to ask you several more questions. So who is eligible for the services provided at the reading clinic, and does one require a referral?
So,
Sorry. I'm happy to start off with the core reading program. So for the core reading program, students will have had to have had a psychoeducational assessment first. I realize that seems like a big barrier, but there's a lot of reasons to it. And at the core, we want to make sure students are getting the services they need, whether that's with us or someone else. We want to make sure that we can work diagnostically and prescriptively, understanding their profile. And we want, excuse me, we want to ensure that they're getting access to accommodations, IEP, whatever it is that they need through school. So it's really, it's not for us, it's for them to get where they need to be. So you don't need a referral to come into the core reading program, but you do need an assessment. And that will be the process that gets us started. And it is for primary school age students for entry. Our assessment program also focuses in on primary school age children. We will reassess our students when they come back years later, but typically primary school age children. For an assessment with a reading clinic, you don't need a referral. If you are looking to go elsewhere, we'd recommend that you check in about that with the service provider prior to starting the process, because that can impact things like insurance coverage and things like that.
So a parent can call you and you can set up the assessment appointments with them.
We'll set them up with a free consultation with our assessment director and get the process started. Yeah.
Beautiful. What happens if a teacher calls? What do you tell the teacher?
I would speak without talking any names or identifying details and give some
Yes.
very general feedback. Sometimes we're asking for tips or strategies to use, but we'll always be encouraging them to encourage the parent or legal guardian to reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Is there a cost for your services?
There is. So I'll start with assessment this time. You know, with an assessment, you have a large number of hours with an extremely qualified individual, so the cost will add up very quickly. Locally, rates range between $3,500 to $7,000 for psychoeducational assessments or even neuropsych assessments, which is quite a range, but they encompass different things.
Yes.
We know that sounds like a lot of money, so there are ways to offset that. You know, the reading clinic offers these assessments, and we offer bursaries to families based on level of need. Insurance providers may also cover some of the cost or all of the cost as well, so we encourage you to speak with them. If you're going outside of the reading clinic, and if you're with us, we'll walk you through that during the consultation process. And if you're a student in a government school, you might also be able to access a psychoeducational assessment through the Ministry of Education.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
And for tutoring, there is a fee for that as well, because it is that's that
Yes.
therapy that we talked
Yes.
about, that intensive one-on-one with a specialized person. So for that reason, it is at a cost, but similar to the psychoeducational assessments, we do offer bursaries. So we encourage families to
Excellent.
apply.
That's very generous. Can you just tell our readers where the Reading Clinic is located and how you can be contacted, please?
So, very easy. We're on 54 Serpentine Road. So, anybody who needs landmarks, like myself, it is behind Royal Gazette and in between Royal Gazette and BHS. So, when you're going around the roundabout to go to BAA, we're right that little yellow building in the corner. And you can give us a call at 292-3938.
Can you repeat that number again, please?
Sorry, sure. 292-3938.
That's nice and easy.
And since we also have our other two programs that we didn't really get to talk about, so we do have a website, which is readingclinic.bm.
Excellent, excellent. Well, today again, our topic was Understanding Dyslexia. And we invite the listeners to keep an eye on this spot for the next episode of Bermuda Health-Abets, but also for you to leave any feedback in our comment section on the Department of Health Bermuda YouTube page, and also to follow us on Facebook at Department of Health Bermuda, and also YouTube Department of Health Bermuda. Thank you, audience, for listening, and I want to thank Miss Amy Da Costa and Miss Stacey Kyme from the Reading Clinic for coming this morning to share some really important information to help our listeners to learn more about dyslexia. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You have been listening to Bermuda Health-Abets. Please note, anything you heard on this podcast is not a substitute for visiting your healthcare provider. If you have a topic or want a question answered, please contact the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health by emailing healthpromotion@gov.bm or by calling 278-4900. Be sure to listen out for the next episode of Bermuda Health-Abets.